The government owns 40% of my pension fund because when I pull the money out when I retire to consume, they take 40%. So they're the owners. That's hidden assets of the government. Given the government tax rate on distributions by businesses to owners about 50%, the government owns 50% of the businesses. If you look at property taxes in the United States, the government owns about 35 to 40% of the houses. Real estate, which is a big component of the net worth of households. There are some policy constraints. There's limits on tax and credits, which I've already talked about, tax and transfers, and lump sum transfers. Increase the tax rates will not increase revenue to finance increase transfers. The limits on the amount of government borrowing, I didn't realize this and got into a lot of trouble in the Federal Reserve System because I said we don't have enough government debt. But now the Greece made me realize that governments cannot honor the amount of debt. The amount of government debt we needed in the 50s was 0 relative to GDP. Now it's about, with a pure savings for retirement system, it would be 5 GMPs. Government may promise it, but they will not honor those promises. They will default. More privately owned and less publicly owned capital is a way to increase private saving opportunities without over capital accumulation. So what should be done? Eliminate taxes on capital income. If you're saving for retirement, it's nice to have earn higher wages during your working life and be able to save at a higher interest rate. That makes your future consumption cheaper in terms of current consumption. Conclusion, countries that control government spending and are not piggish have been doing well. Poland, Brazil, India and China, fairly spectacular. I would like to thank you for your attention. China should stay open, should develop their high tech, should invest abroad. And maybe, I don't know why they're lending so much to the United States at such a low interest rate. But thank you for the gift.
普雷斯科特教授深入地分析了本轮危机的根源及对美国的深远影响，并对美国政府的危机新政进行了剖析。对于中国，他充满了高度的期待。同时，参与本次国际金融投资博览会的海内外嘉宾都对全球经济的复苏的前景发表了各自的看法，同时更希望中国在后危机时代扮演更为重要的角色。
这个 GCFF， 它的这个是一个很好的一个平台，因为它吸引了等于是，现在等于是很多的从这个研究机构到这个矿业的这个投资人，到这个矿业的拥有人。还有一些专家，它吸引了很多方方面面的人到这个平台上来。尤其是现在中国呢，在这个世界经济上扮演一个越来越重要的一个角色的时候呢，就这个 GCFF 这个平台就显得更加的重要。从我们自己角度来讲哈，那么这算是一个双向的一个我们到这来一个目的嘛。第一个呢，就是说我们来倾听一下，就是说整个这个大家的这个业界啊，对整个黄金是什么样的一个看法。那因为我们自己也有自己的一些看法，看是否能印证我们的一些看法。那也是借助他们的这个华德专利，比如像诺贝尔奖的这个经济奖的这个获得者是吧 ，Edward， 那么在一个很高的层面上来讲的全球的经济，还有这个黄金在里面的这些作用。目前来看呢，中国是不但是最大的黄金生产商，实际上呢，现在有报道说啊，现在我们有最终拿到这个数，有可能超过印度成为第一大的消费的这样的一个国度，所以这也是一个很大的一个推动力对金价。中国黄金现在的一个战略就是以黄金为主。以多种金属并举这样的一个大的一个战略，那实际上意义呢？说你可以从这个名字上来看嘛，中国黄金仍然是以黄金为主的一个生产商。那么这里既包括从国内的现有的这个资源上要整合，要这个扩储，要增加产量，同时呢，这是向海外也要加大这个扩张的力度，加大这个并购的力度。
When I was here 6 years ago, I had predicted gold would go to $1,000. Gold was below $500 an ounce. My expectation is that near term it should go to $2,000, but I don't expect that will be the peak. My feeling is the gold will go much higher. And the main drivers for gold is that the U.S. dollar is going down. My view is that the Americans have produced much too much dollars, and that is cheapening their currency. So investors are buying gold as a protection against what we call debasement of the currencies. Also, that's driving gold is as more people in China get more wealthier, they buy more gold. In the first 10 months of this year, the purchases, imports in China increased 5 times. That's much more than the buying in the West. So my belief is looking over the next 12 months, as China and India becomes more prosperous, that they are going to buy more gold.
We are here in Shanghai at the GCFF conference to meet with investors and potential industrial partners. We've had a lot of interest from local parties, both investors as well as companies, in our projects and participating in either the investment side or participating potentially as a partner on these projects. So we're here to continue those discussions with those groups. I've been now here twice with South American Silver. This is our second trip to Shanghai. We had a very successful first trip, and so we're here again. We think it's very positive. We think that gold and silver and other metals, the global demand is increasing, and that it is a good time for investors to look at investing in companies that will benefit from the increasing value of those metals. We think that the conference that's been put together here is a great opportunity for investors and industrial partners to be introduced to quality companies that have early stage projects and to bring the opportunity both of the company and for the investor together.
欢迎再次回到2010国际金融投资博览会高端经济论坛的现场。接下来为我们进行主旨演讲的嘉宾是美国经济学会原副主席、著名的经济学家罗伯特·巴罗先生。他演讲的主题是对还在进行中的国际金融危机及衰退的思考。有请罗伯特·巴罗先生。
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, particularly because I'm sometimes treated like a rock star in China, unlike in the United States, so that makes a big difference. I thought I would start with just a few remarks about the origin of the financial crisis in the United States. I think it's clear that the problem started in the housing mortgage markets in the U.S. And I think the key underlying factor, if one goes back some years, is that people thought it was zero probability that the housing market would ever show an average price decline on a nationwide basis in the U.S., that nobody ever thought it was possible that house prices would fall very much, or in particular fall by 20 to 30%, which is what actually happened during the crisis. And this particularly became an issue along with the innovations that had occurred in the financial sector in terms of new kinds of securitization, such as mortgage-backed securities and related kinds of instruments. Now that it's understood that you can have these kinds of problems in the housing market, and particularly you can have house price declines of something like 20 to 30%. So since this mistake is not going to be repeated again, so one part of the government reaction to the crisis in terms of increased commitments and to some extent expenditure, I actually would support. But another major piece, a bigger piece in terms of dollars, is the fiscal stimulus package of 2009-2010, which represented an outlay of about $800 billion total by the U.S. government. This package, I think, was a great mistake. It was basically a lot of government expenditure that was not carefully considered in terms of being directly productive. It wasn't the kind of infrastructure investment that, for example, China has undertaken in the same period. It was basically influenced by a Keynesian kind of reasoning that by having this kind of fiscal expansion, the government would expand the economy and thereby get out of the recession. I think a more important and ongoing mistake is the expansion of the unemployment insurance program in the United States. Now, the main expansion there was an increase in the period of eligibility. So the program usually worked by having 26 weeks of eligibility for people who had lost their jobs. But in the current environment, we instead raised the period of eligibility to almost 2 years, that is to famous 99 weeks associated with the program. Now, of course, I think about this as basically a subsidy to being unemployed. And therefore, I predict that this program would make people be more likely to be unemployed and to be unemployed for a longer period of time than they would be otherwise. In fact, what's happened in the United States is there's been a tremendous increase in the fraction of the unemployed who are now long-term unemployed. I find that the Federal Reserve's monetary policy is surprisingly a big issue in China and some other countries. I guess the idea is that people are worried that the Federal Reserve is pursuing a very expansionary, potentially inflationary monetary policy. To think about the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, you have to know that Ben Bernanke, the chair, did his main research about the U.S. Great Depression of the 1930s. So Ben's nightmare, unquestionably, is that he will be in charge, he'll be the chair of the Federal Reserve, at a time when the U.S. goes into an economic depression of a sort that might be comparable to that of the 1930s. So basically, as chair of the Federal Reserve, the head of the U.S. Central Bank, he's done whatever he could to try to avoid a depression kind of outcome. And that to him is always being more expansionary.